Welcome to English 3, Analysis of Paired Selections, Literary Nonfiction and Fiction, Reading of the Paired Text. The first selection is literary nonfiction, excerpted from Bob Dole's One Soldier's Story, a memoir. Chapter 1, What a Life. He looked so young, just a boy really, not much more than 21 years of age. It wasn't fair that he'd already experienced so much pain and misery in his short lifetime. It wasn't right that his lofty hopes and dreams for the future had been snuffed out by one blast from an enemy explosive device. But there he was, in the intensive care unit at the Walter Reed Army Medical Center in Washington, D.C., fighting for his life. My wife Elizabeth and I often visited wounded soldiers at Walter Reed, but this occasion was different. It was Christmas Day 2004, and I was about to be discharged from the hospital myself. I had recently undergone surgery in New York and had been transferred to the medical center in Washington to recuperate. We were in the dining room shortly before 2 o'clock, visiting with several young soldiers who had been wounded in the Iraq War, when a mother and daughter spied us. They approached us and introduced themselves as distant relatives of my family. The mother then told us about her son, Craig Nelson, the young man in whose room I now stood. My friend, Dr. Charles Chuck Peck, had informed me of Craig's presence in the hospital, and I had hoped to see him before I left, so the encounter seemed almost providential. Craig had been badly wounded while on patrol in Iraq a week or so before Christmas. He suffered severe damage to his C1 vertebrae and was paralyzed from his neck down. Now lying in an intensive care unit at Walter Reed, he couldn't move a muscle. He was hooked up to all sorts of medical machines, with various tubes running to his body, an electrocardiogram monitoring his heart, a respirator helping him to breathe, and a tracheotomy in his throat. Nevertheless, the young man's eyes brightened as I stepped up to his bedside. His mother introduced us. Craig, this is Bob Dole. Craig's sister joined us around the bed. Craig couldn't speak, but he could hear me and seemed to respond with his eyes. Looking at Craig, I felt a wave of emotion sweep over me, nearly overwhelming me. It was like seeing a mirror image of myself 60 years earlier. He was tall and muscular, about 6 feet, 1.5 inches, and about 185 pounds, almost identical to my World War II height and weight. For a moment I was back there, in a similar hospital bed, encased in plaster, unable to move, paralyzed from the neck down. I just stood there at Craig's bedside. I can feel my heart thumping loudly in my chest, my emotions rushing to the surface. I knew the tough road Craig had before him, and his condition was far worse than mine had been. I reached out my hand, my left hand, touched the soldier's arm and said, "Good luck, Craig. You're in a great hospital. They'll take great care of you." We stayed only about 5 minutes. I looked the young man in the eyes one more time, then turned to his mother, put my arm around her shoulder, and said, "We'll pray for Craig's recovery. Please let me know if I can help." Unfortunately, a few days later, Craig Nelson, another American hero, passed away. I grieved for that family and became more determined that this book would do something to help others understand their pain and the trauma that so many others have endured because of war. I've seen these kids in the hospitals and out, people who face seemingly impossible challenges, and I've seen myself in them. Whatever reassurance, hope, and inspiration I can offer them comes out of my own life experiences. It's said often that my generation is the greatest generation. That's not a title we claimed for ourselves. Truth be told, we were ordinary Americans fated to confront extraordinary tests. Every generation of young men and women who dare to face the realities of war, fighting for freedom, defending our country, with the willingness to lay their lives on the line, is the greatest generation. In the end, what gets people through a physical or emotional crisis is not new technology or medication. Those things can help, of course, but it's faith that gives you the strength to endure. Faith that won't allow you to give up, faith that manifests itself in a ferocious determination to take the next step, the one that everyone else says is impossible. Adversity can be a harsh teacher, but its lessons often define our lives. As much as we may wish that we could go back and relive them, do things differently, make better, wiser decisions, we can't change history. War is like that. You can rewrite it, attempt to infuse it with your own personal opinions, twist or spin it to make it more palatable, but eventually the truth will come out. Those pivotal moments remain indelibly impressed in your heart and mind. For me, the defining period in my life was not running for the highest office in the land. It started years earlier in a foreign country where hardly anyone knew my name. Dear Mom and Dad, what a life! I can hardly believe that I'm living in such a wonderful place. My rest is about over, but I've really enjoyed myself so far. I'm going on a tour this afternoon, also one tomorrow morning. I should see about everything when I'm finished. The radio is playing. It reminds me of the time that I've been home playing Norma Jean's records. So far, I haven't heard any records by Frank Sinatra. I guess he isn't too popular over here. The war news really sounds good. I guess Russia plans on helping us with Japan. Keep your eyes on the news for big things to happen. Had a fine breakfast this morning. Scrambled eggs, bacon, tomato juice, toast, and coffee. I sure miss my quart of milk per day. Tell Aunt Mildred to be sure to save some for Kenny and me when we get home. I ran into a lieutenant in Eugene's camp only yesterday, but still haven't seen Eugene. So bye for now. Love, Bob. The second selection is a fiction selection excerpted from Tim O'Brien's The Things They Carried. This particular chapter is entitled Ambush. When she was 9, my daughter Kathleen asked if I had ever killed anyone. She knew about the war. She knew I had been a soldier. "You keep writing war stories," she said, "so I guess you must have killed somebody." It was a difficult moment, but I did what seemed right, which was to say, "Of course not," and then to take her onto my lap and hold her for a while. Someday, I hope, she'll ask again. But here, I want to pretend she's a grown-up. I want to tell her exactly what happened, or what I remember happening. And then I want to say to her that as a little girl, she was absolutely right. This is why I keep writing war stories. He was a short, slender young man of about 20. I was afraid of him, afraid of something, and as he passed me on the trail, I threw a grenade that exploded at his feet and killed him. Or to go back. Shortly after midnight, we moved into the ambush site outside of Maikei. The whole platoon was there, spread out in the dense brush along the trail, and for 5 hours nothing at all happened. We were working in 2-man teams, one man on guard while the other slept, switching every 2 hours. And I remember it was still dark when Kiowa shook me awake for the final watch. The night was foggy and hot. For the first few moments, I felt lost, not sure about directions, groping for my helmet and weapon. I reached out and found 3 grenades and lined them up in front of me. The pins had already been straightened for quick throwing. And then, for maybe half an hour, I kneeled there and waited. Very gradually, in tiny slivers, dawn began to break through the fog, and from my position in the brush, I could see 10 or 15 meters up the trail. The mosquitoes were fierce. I remember slapping them, wondering if I should wake up Kiowa and ask for some repellent, then thinking it was a bad idea. Then looking up and seeing a young man come out of the fog. He wore black clothing and rubber sandals and a gray ammunition belt. His shoulders were slightly stooped, his head cocked to the side as if listening for something. He seemed at ease. He carried his weapon in one hand, muzzle down, moving without any hurry up the center of the trail. There was no sound at all, none that I can remember. In a way, it seemed, he was part of the morning fog, or my own imagination, but there was also the reality of what was happening in my stomach. I had already pulled the pin on a grenade. I had come up to a crouch. It was entirely automatic. I did not hate the young man. I did not see him as an enemy. I did not ponder issues of morality or politics or military duty. I crouched and kept my head low. I tried to swallow whatever was rising up from my stomach, which tasted like lemonade, something fruity and sour. I was terrified. There were no thoughts about killing. The grenade was to make him go away, just evaporate. And I leaned back and felt my mind go empty, and then felt it fill up again. I had already thrown the grenade before telling myself to throw it. The brush was thick, and I had to lob it high, not aiming. And I remember the grenade seeming to freeze above me for an instant, as if a camera had clicked. And I remember ducking down and holding my breath and seeing little wisps of fog rise from the earth. The grenade bounced once and rolled across the trail. I did not hear it, but there must have been a sound, because the young man dropped his weapon and began to run, just 2 or 3 quick steps. Then he hesitated, swiveling to his right, and he glanced down at the grenade and tried to cover his head but never did. It occurred to me that he was about to die. I wanted to warn him. The grenade made a popping noise, not soft but not loud either, not what I had expected, and there was a puff of dust and smoke, a small white puff, and the young man seemed to jerk upward as if pulled by invisible wires. He fell on his back. His rubber sandals had been blown off. There was no wind. He lay at the center of the trail, his right leg bent beneath him, his one eye shut, his other a huge star-shaped hole. It was not a matter of live or die. There was no real peril. Almost certainly the young man would have passed by, and it will always be that way. Later, I remember, Kiowa tried to tell me that the man would have died anyway. He told me that it was a good kill, that I was a soldier and this was a war, that I should shape up and stop staring and ask myself what the dead man would have done if things were reversed. None of it mattered. The words seemed far too complicated. All I could do was gape at the fact of the young man's body. Even now, I haven't finished sorting it out. Sometimes I forgive myself. Other times I don't. In the ordinary hours of life, I try not to dwell on it. But now and then, when I'm reading a newspaper or just sitting alone in a room, I'll look up and see the young man coming out of the morning fog. I'll watch him walk toward me, his shoulders slightly stooped, his head cocked to the side, and he'll pass within a few yards of me and suddenly smile at some secret thought, and then continue up the trail to where it bends into the fog.